up having to stay in the woods and no food, no water. And eventually they get in a boat and say, here, okay, you cross right here, there'll be someone waiting for you on the other side. First time they try it, they get swept by the current and get going way up in here, and they have to go all the way back. And so the next day they try it, and it ends up working for them. They get across, and someone is there waiting for them. And they say, hey, come over to my owner's farm, because this is Virginia. Come over to my owner's farm, and they'll let you stay a night. So they do. And the next day they decided to go off to, they want to go to Bowling Green. Bowling Green is about 20-30 miles away from Garrett's farm, which is where he ends up staying the night. Because that's where a lot of Confederate soldiers are, that they think. That's what they've been told. And so they get down here and they see Garrett's farm, and they think, you know what, we'll just ask him to stay the night. Remember I talked about the open door policy? Same thing. You knock on someone's door and say, hey, I'm really tired, I don't know where to sleep tonight, can I stay at your house? They'd say, sure, why not? I don't know about you guys, but I wouldn't really feel comfortable with just some stranger sleeping at my house at night. But that's what it was. And so they stayed there that night. And then next morning, Garrett wakes up and sees Booth playing with his kids. And doesn't think that's bad. And the aspect of today, that's like, you got an assassin playing with your kids. Like, it's kind of weird. But he had no idea. And every Sunday morning, the father would read the paper to the kids, so they could know what was going on in the United States. And first thing he says is, who could have done this? Who could have assassinated Lincoln? I mean, if I even see that guy, I'm not killing him. And of course, he has no idea that the guy that actually did this sits right next to him. And so he's sitting there with his like, yes, he has no idea that I'm sitting right here and what I've done. And he doesn't tell him anything, but he decides to ask him to stay one more night. And he's like, well, you know, I kind of want to stay in the barn. I mean, I don't want to be too hasty about anything. And he's like, sure, okay, so you stay in the barn. And later that night, Booth ends up sending Harold to go to Bowling Green, like I said, to go get a buggy for them to ride in. And as he's going there, right outside Bowling Green, he sees a bunch of Union cavalrymen. And he's like, uh-oh. So he sprints back and tells Booth, hey, there are cavalrymen like 20 miles from us. I don't think you realize this. He's like, don't worry about it. They won't find us here. It'll be fine. We'll get up in the morning and we'll go. Well, unfortunately, a different cavalry unit headed by Lafayette Baker and Colonel Concord, they end up showing up at Garrett's house early in the morning and saying, have you seen these two guys? And he's like, really bummed. He's like, I can't believe I actually let them stay here. And so Garrett's son actually directs them to the barn, and they knock on the door and says, anyone there? We don't hear anything. He's like, great, just let us take nothing. And then they knock, and then Colonel Conger says, okay, if you're in there, you got two options. You gotta come out and be arrested, or we can just burn this sucker down. And they finally said, well, wait. And it's like, oh gosh, there's people actually in there. It might be them. So they find out that it actually is John Wilkes Booth in there, and they finally say again, well, now you have one option. You can either die, or you can probably just die, because we're probably going to kill you when you come out. So David Harold is in there, and he goes, Booth, I can't do this anymore. So he just leaves, runs out the building, and the colonels go grab him, take him into custody, but Booth is still in there. He wants to die for his country, die for the South, but ends up getting a little too confident in himself. And this man, Boston Corbett, a little bit about him, he was a little bit of a psycho. He ended up being instituted in a mental hospital in 1873 because of this incident, which I'll talk about in a sec, and because he castrated himself. He decided that he found a girl that he really loved, and he didn't want to have any more intimacy but her. he said, castrate himself and go on. And that's probably the reason why they instituted in there. But anyways, he sticks his rifle through a hole in the barn and shoots Booth. It hits him right in the neck, and he's instantly paralyzed. Now, I don't know much about shooting, but that's a pretty good shot. You can shoot someone that early in the morning, barely any light, through flames and smoke. You can hit a guy, paralyze him. So they drag Booth's body out. He's not dead yet. He dies about 2 hours later, and on the porch of Garrett's farm. And as he's sitting there lying, they're just basically taking out all his stuff, and they find 6 pictures of women on there. None of them were Lucy, which is kind of weird. It means he was just seeing other people at the same time. But the last thing he says is, "Tell my mother I died for my country." And that's where Marianne Holmes finally realizes he did something for his country. So, to take all these guys back, all the conspirators, and they put them on a warship, which is basically where they'll be in jail. There's jails on warships. And taken into custody, put on trial, and they're all sentenced to hang. Now, the thing about Mary Surratt here is that back then, and even today, it's illegal to go to be in court and be tried by a military. So what happens is if you break a law now, you go to a court and you are given a jury by your peers. So let's say he commits something, you guys all get to determine if he's guilty or not. In this case, it was her versus the high officials of the military, which is illegal. So he obviously sentenced her to hang, and July 22nd, they were all hung. Interesting fact, Mary Surratt was the first woman ever hung by the United States government, and I don't remember the last time a woman was executed, even like in Nebraska, I can't remember. I think it was the 70s or 80s, I'm not for sure. But the death of these two, Powell and Asssassination, is kind of ironic. They ended up strangling. Because what happens is when you get hung, it ends up, it's supposed to bleed right away. But in their case, the noose wasn't tight enough or loose, or too loose, and they ended up strangling for about 10 or 15 minutes. So it was a slow struggle, and they're just dangling there.
Is that a legitimate picture of them being hanged?
Yes, that is, yeah, okay, well, this obviously isn't, but this is a legit picture of them. That was taken right after, so yeah, that's what you get for trying to kill the president. And as soon as this happened, conspiracies started throwing up. There was conspiracy theories of the Pope sending Booth letters that say kill the president. That was never true. There was threats of putting yellow fever in Lincoln's collars to get him yellow fever. There was even an attempt to bomb the White House. That never happened either because they couldn't get the ammo. And then the major one is, I think it was like 1920 something, 1923. A man died in Texas and kind of had the same look as Booth. Kind of had a somewhat similar story that Booth might have had if he had gotten away. And this guy was like, what a deal. I can take this guy's body and take it around the country and say it's Booth and make millions of dollars. So we ended up doing that. And it really wasn't Booth, but that was mummified, basically. And finally the FBI find out about this, and they're like, dude, that's the guy from Texas. Like, that's not John Wilkes Booth. We have his papers right here. And so they end up discrediting it, and he ends up writing a book that only sells like 1,000 copies about his journey with John Wilkes Booth. And then he ends up getting basically wiped off. Like, everyone is just like, this guy is a nutcase. And so after that, they started wondering, was it really Booth that died in the barn? So just recently, they dug up what supposedly is Booth's remains and took a vertebrate and are comparing it now to a relative of his. So we're going to find out in a couple years, hopefully, whether or not it actually was Booth. I think it was. There's really a lot of evidence that supports it. But that's basically it. And now I'm going to show you guys a clip from The Conspirator, which will give you, and now that I've talked about it, it'll give you a little more representation of how it really was. So, just hold on just a sec. I will get this out for you.
Yeah, The Conspirator's a movie, like a Hollywood movie, that came out a year or two ago. And it's pretty faithful to the story itself. They did a pretty historically accurate job.
Now I have no fortune, but I am filled over with affection that I am ready to pour